Bienvenidos a la serie de personajes del canal del Congreso. Soy Rina Musali y el día de hoy tenemos la oportunidad de platicar con Silvana Koch Mehrin. Ella es fundadora del Foro Global de Mujeres Parlamentarias y además fue vicepresidenta del Parlamento Europeo.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Silvana, which are the topics and the messages that Women in Parliament's Global Forum is addressing in Mexico?
The motto of our conference is "Make it happen," and it's about the power and the influence of women in parliament. And we want to take stock of what has happened in the last 40 years since the first Women Conference of the UN, which took place in Mexico. So what happened in the last 40 years, but also what do we want to see happen in the future. And we come to Mexico also because of the important constitutional change that Mexico had for parity in political representation. And I can see that among the participants there is a big interest in how did it happen? How did Mexico make it happen to come to such an ambitious constitution?
Women have reached political influence in the last years. However, there is still a gap we need to close and fully implement, which is the women's leadership status as head of states and government.
It's a very sad situation, if I be very frank with you. Almost 80% of all seats in the parliaments around the world are held by men. 78% to be exact. In governments it's even worse. It's 83% are male ministers, and among the highest political position, heads of state, heads of government, it's less than 20 of the almost 200 countries around the world. So there is a lot to do, and the World Economic Forum measures every year the gender gap in different areas: economics, health, education, politics. And it's clear that politics, the gender gap, so the difference in what can men and women achieve, is by far the largest. And that's why a network like that is there to try to advance the closing of that gap. Well, unfortunately, there's no region in the world where you can say, yes, we're there, we got it. This is the country that we all want to look at as our role model. In all Africa, for example, you have 2 women who are head of state. Of all the African countries, 2 countries are led by women.
53 countries, just two head of states.
Exactly. But then again, you've got countries like Rwanda, where 64% of the parliamentarians are women. You can see in Latin America that there are some very visible women in very, very high positions, but this does not necessarily have impact on the parliamentary composition. Take Brazil, there is less than 10% women in the parliament, but there is a very visible female leader. You have in Europe countries like the Scandinavian countries, which are built on a societal consensus where it is no longer a fundamental discussion, can women get into leadership positions? But also there you have not reached the 50%, and you have to remain vigilant because some governments then reduce again the number of women in ministerial positions. So unfortunately, there is no country yet where we can say this is the
role model.
The role model.
Yes. The United Nations will witness a new leadership next year. What are the chances of getting a woman being appointed as Secretary General?
We can, what makes us all very hopeful and positively minded is that there is an increased discussion, shouldn't it be a woman? And the fact that this discussion is happening is already an important element, because there is a waking up around the globe that we need more women in political leadership. And the Women in Parliament's Global Forum endorsed and signed a call for action that was presented by President Bachelet together with UN Women earlier this year, which calls for more women in the international institutions, highest positions, and also on a national level to not only make declarations but also deliver tangible results. And we can see that the G20, that the OECD, that others call for that and also begin to act on this. So to have a woman in leading as a leader would obviously be an important signal. We've seen other functions like in the IMF with Christine Lagarde, or also in as the president of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, that there are women taking leadership roles which are for the first time held by women.
United States presidential campaign has begun. What would it mean Hillary Clinton becoming the first female president in the US history?
I always find it important that despite obviously the question man-woman, that women are also seen as a political candidate, so that they're not seen only as a woman candidate. So take the example of Germany, my home country. We have a very powerful female leader of our country, and she yes, of course she is a woman, but her power is not only because she is a woman. And I think this is the step that we have to achieve, that somebody...
That's the message we need to widespread. Yes.
Indeed.
Silvana, significant inequalities persist between women and men. We haven't reached gender parity in the workplace as judges, as diplomats. Do you think we need to strengthen women's participation as peace builders and peacemakers?
Absolutely. We do need to strengthen that role of women. And there is this very powerful sentence which I like to quote here, that women should no longer be passive victims of war, but active agents of peace. And I do believe that women can bring a lot to the table. And there's this horrifying figure that of all those peacekeeping missions and peace negotiations that are going on around the globe, and they're more than ever because we've got more conflicts than ever, only 3% of those who are part of the peace achieving process are women. And yet they would have the highest interest in having a sustainable, peaceful situation, because women are too often those passive victims of war. So yes, that's one of the areas where we need more women.
A new development agenda has been adopted worldwide. Which are the goals for women facing the 2030?
What is important in these goals that have been just recently decided in the United Nations is that gender equality is one of the goals, a separate goal in itself, but also that in the other goals that are formulated, the gender aspect is recognized, because you can find no policy area where there is no gender aspect in it. Every policy area has a gender dimension, and this is recognized, so that is very important. And now it's important that after these beautiful decisions and declarations, things are really beginning to happen. And that's one of the elements of our conference here, that parliamentarians take this on as their topic and hold their governments accountable for what the government members have decided in New York, in the United Nations, to say, okay, this is the decision, and now what's your to-do list following that?
What could you comment about financing gender parity? Is that issue was addressed in the International Summit of Finance in Ethiopia, Addis Abeba?
It's always important. Money makes the world go round, as you say. And if you don't have the budget allocations to give priority to a certain policy area, not much will happen. So to have this financial resource mobilization was part of the conference also that we held in Addis Abeba in the framework of the big UN conference, Finance for Development. We had a specific session on that, and we continue doing this here in cooperation with the OECD on taxation, to really make understood that you need to have the financing means, and this begins by what do you tax and how do you tax, but then also with the money coming into the state budget, where do you spend it afterwards? So these both sides have an important role to play.
Which woman do you admire the most in the political arena, and why?
This is a very difficult question because what I admire in those few women who really made it to the top and also made it to stay at the top, what I admire is that resilience and the ambition to open the doors for other women. And what maybe on a personal note, I had the great honor to have many times met Angela Merkel, and what I find fantastic in her as a leader is that she brought a very new leadership style in politics to Germany, where it was all about pushing up your sleeves and being loud, that she has a very different style, which is now accepted as a leadership style too. And this is something where I'm sure next generations can benefit from.
Silvana, thank you very much for joining us in this TV show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a las personas que nos acompañan en el canal del Congreso. Soy Rina Musal y los esperamos en un siguiente programa. Hasta pronto.